can you please share the key principles for good token economy design?
Identify key stakeholders. What does your token represent? You need to anchor yourself to something that's stable.
So that's a little teaser of the webinar that I was invited to deliver for the Web3 CFO Club, which I'm going to be sharing with you today. It includes that section where I reveal those 3 top tips that you need to design a good utility-based token economy. But first, it's been a while since I posted, so I thought I'd share a quick update on what's been going on behind the scenes. If you want to skip straight to the webinar, just use the timestamps that I've created for you to do so. So, long story short, I have been busy. Not yet busy with client or project work, but busy executing on the upskilling that I resolved to achieve for myself last summer after my amazing experience at ETHCC in Paris. I'm happy to say that I've now made enough tangible progress to feel confident that this work is going to deliver an important upgrade to what I bring to my work and what I offer my clients. And also, once I get back to it, to the quality of content and knowledge that I'm going to be able to share with you here on this channel. However, for the time being, I will still be posting fewer videos. The tasks I'm working on right now have clear, external, and unmovable deadlines that I have to meet. So I can't do what I was doing before and continue allocating some fixed share of my time to content creation just for now. So what exactly am I up to? Well, for one, I'm sitting an exam in May. The second exam that I need to pass to qualify for the FRM certification in financial risk management. Now, I'm a little older than what most people seem to think when they first see me. It was over 10 years ago that I sat my CFA exam, so it's been quite something to go back into that kind of study mode, something I swore I'd never do again. And yet, I'm happy to brag that I passed the first exam last November, hitting top quartiles in all of the areas tested. And hopefully I'm not setting myself up for a humiliating defeat by sharing that. I'm making sure that I throw just as much effort at this second exam as I threw at the first. I might make a video that goes into the details of my FRM study experience once it's all done, but my hot take right now is that it's probably a bit of overkill for the next steps that I'm going to be taking in my career, but it may pay off more strongly in the longer term. At the very least, this study has demystified the whole subject of risk management for me, and I feel I can talk in a much more confident and informed manner about these issues and identify the areas which I'm already skilled and adept at handling quantitatively for myself. And there's another big project that I've been busying myself with. I've been teaching myself SQL, learning about specific smart contracts, and how to use Dune to conduct my very own on-chain data analysis, which is incredibly exciting. Since starting this channel, most of my efforts have been spent nailing down theoretical principles and frameworks for good tokenomic analysis. In a new field that's fraught with fads, hype, outsized personalities, and cult-like beliefs, getting to that kind of theoretical clarity has been really, really important. However, this will only go so far. And the fact is, we have reams of on-chain data that with a little work actually tells us what people are doing on these blockchains. Yes, real people, not fictional agents that we create for mathematical simulations. As I said in a recent video, in my view, mature tokenomic practice has to make use of this real-world data and incorporate it into analysis, design, and engineering practices. Now, I'm keeping the exact focus of my research under wraps for now because the fact is, I'm so paranoid that I believe that people have nothing better to do with their lives except to watch everything I do online so that they can steal my work and take my ideas away from me. But I'm delighted to say that it is going really well. I've gotten everything I already need off Dune, already lots of interesting insights beginning to emerge from that data, and have exported it out for more flexible exploration and hopefully some light back testing analysis in Python, which will add another great skills to my stack. In the meantime, I put in my first application for a speaking opportunity to share the outcomes of that research in conferences in the northern summer. Hence why that on-chain research work also has a deadline that I need to keep. So wish me luck with that. Hopefully there will be enough time for me to publish a handful of videos sharing the details of that research with you on this channel immediately after. And something else that's unbelievably important, I want to thank you for your support We crossed 1,000 subs last year. And even though I'm not posting as much right now, I'm still gaining about 80 new subscribers each month. Now, this really means a lot to me. Not only is it an ongoing validation of the effort that I've put into this content, but it also is gradually helping to build up a good brand for me and is creating lots of great introductions and connections for me. And also, I want to say thanks a ton to those of you who have been buying my token sale course online. That's a real support for me, as well as I've otherwise just been relying on my savings to invest in this channel and make those upgrades to my professional skills. Okay, so that's it for the updates. Time to move on to the main act for today, which is this webinar, which I was invited to deliver for the Web3 CFO Club. I've been a member for some time now. They've been an amazing group full of Web3 professionals with strong backgrounds in traditional finance, accounting, and the like. It was so amazing to discover this group. So much of what I was hearing from them felt familiar, and it helped to reassure me that I was thinking my way through key issues in a way that made sense, even if that sometimes put me at odds with the traditional crypto crowd. I've put in full details in the description box below of how to connect with them and where to find them, but be warned, this is an exclusive club. They are looking to grow, but not anyone who applies will be admitted. The founders understand that the value of this community rests in curating it to ensure that the quality is consistently high. On the slide there, you have a picture of Justin Grana, who was my co-speaker for this webinar. He has been working as a professional game theorist prior to his Web3 career, and I was unbelievably excited when I saw his resume, which includes time at the Santa Fe Institute, one of the most prestigious places in the world to work for the study of complex systems, that has seen revolutionary approaches to economics being developed, which I read a lot about in my university days. Amazing research coming out of there. He is now Principal Economist at Edge and Node, the team behind the Graph, which is a project that indexes blockchain data to make it more accessible. So hopefully there's more than enough there to get you excited about what's coming up. So without any further ado, time to get on with the main show.
Welcome, everyone, to the Web3 CFO Club session on decoding tokenomics. I'm Alejandra, Community Manager at the Web3 CFO Club. We are covering a critical topic today with two expert panelists. They're going to introduce themselves in just a moment, but let's give the latecomers a couple of minutes to log on and start with some housekeeping items. So first thing is, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that you're currently in the chat tab. So right there where you are, please go and introduce yourself in the chat tab, and then tell us where in the world you are tuning in from. So I'm typically based in Paris, France, but today I'm joining from the Canary Islands, and our two panelists are joining from opposite sides of the world. So Roderick, you're in Thailand, is that right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. Another nice island.
Yes. And Justin, are you in DC?
Yes, ma'am.
Fantastic. Awesome. Let's take a look. Let's make sure the chat tab is working. If you just put your name and then where you're tuning in from, that would be awesome. We've got Raymond here, Jan as well. Are you seeing any other names? Awesome. George from Lebanon, Chris from Brighton, Oliver, Puerto Rico, Dan from the UK. Hi, Dan. Good to see you here. Richard from London. Lovely to see you, Richard. Jan from Berlin. Maggie from Las Vegas. Hey, Maggie. Great to see you here. It's so fun. We've got such a global community, and it's so cool to see how many different time zones we're in. So thanks, everyone. Sally from Canada. Awesome to see you here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Next up is going to be the question tab. So again, on the right-hand side of your screen, right underneath the chat tab, you'll see a little question mark, and that is the questions tab. So at the end of the panel, we're going to save 10 to 15 minutes for the panelists to answer your specific question. So please feel free throughout the webinar. If there's something that comes to mind that you're like, oh, I need to know the answer to this, I need Roderick and Justin to share their wisdom, go ahead and pop that question in the questions tab. And like I said, we're going to save 10 to 15 minutes at the end to make sure that your questions are answered. So, a couple of words about who we are. The Web3 CFO Club is a community for finance and operations leaders in Web3. So, we host online events just like this one, roughly once a month. We do in person events as well. The one that we're going to do is at Token 2049 in Dubai next month. So, please, if you're there, definitely join us. And finally, we also have a private Slack group where members discuss their challenges and they share best practices. And it's just a great place to grow your professional network as well. So if you are not yet a member, please do go to Web3CFO .club to join us. And the Web3 CFO Club is powered by Request Finance, which is a tool that saves you time on crypto invoicing, payroll, as well as expenses. And we've processed nearly 700 million in crypto payments to date. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go to request.finance. Okay. I think that's all the housekeeping. Who else do we have? We've got Mo Yang from Toronto, Philip for Berlin. Awesome. Thanks so much for being here today. Let's turn our attention to our guests. We've got incredible experts today. So let's start with Roderick. Will you please take a couple minutes and introduce yourself, Roderick?
Thank you, Alejandra. My name is Roderick McKinley. These days I go as an independent tokenomics advisor. Although really, that can span into a range of things, including product strategy, fundraising, and so on. I actually started my career in corporate finance, commercializing and financing industrial scale renewable energy projects. And after that, I served as a freelance financial modeler, enjoying a remote work lifestyle way before the pandemic, actually. And then I got lucky enough to get to be stuck on a tropical island when the pandemic hit, and happened to cross paths with some cryptocurrency entrepreneurs who broke me into the space. Now, obviously, money was very loose during the last bull market. All the same, I managed to help about 20 projects raise 150 million US dollars in new startup capital, and was able to stay in touch and take a close look at some of their journeys through that process and after that. And I started out focused on arranging token sales, structuring them. But along the way, clients started asking me for like deeper economic design work to help strengthen their pitches to investors, strengthen their product narratives. And that brought me into this fascinating reconnection to earlier studies in economics that I'd done at university. And I began to understand how blockchain technology really gives us a whole bunch of tools and capabilities that allow us to address problems that, I had to pass exams, um, uh, regurgitating that, these were impossible problems to solve. And after market blew up in 2022, I decided to take some time out from my client work to really build my own understanding and skills in this area and develop a stronger sense of what constitutes good practice in this field. And I've been sharing that journey on a YouTube channel called Token Design, and brought out an e-learning course on all the stuff that I'd managed to absorb and learn about token sale fundraising. And at the moment, I'm finishing up some studies in financial risk management and doing some on-chain research to understand DEX liquidity better, and hopefully arrive at some data-driven financial planning and treasury management recommendations on the back of that. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Roderick. And great YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen it yet, do check it out. And Justin, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Roderick. I envy your experience. I'm fairly new to this world. I'm a principal economist at Edge and Node. We are a core developer of the Graph, decentralized indexing protocol. Before this, in past lives, I worked at think tanks, policy think tanks, as well as in large technology, mostly focusing on economic issues. I'm a game theorist by training, but I also work on applied econometrics, as well as some machine learning, because you kind of have to these days. But my path to Web3 was through the game theory lens and mechanism design. And I'm learning a whole lot now about why that was and was not the right path, but I love the path that I'm on. and it's a great place to be.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here. It is a pleasure to have this conversation with you today. So let's get started and let's start at the beginning. If we look back at the ICO days in around 2017, token allocations were majority public sales, and this is nearly non-existent in 2023, 2024. So they've gone from 55% in 2017 to less than 1% now. So this transition away from public sales has gone largely toward community and ecosystem-based incentives is what we've seen recently. And so this, with such a stark change in such a few short years, it would be really interesting to understand what happened here and just begin with the basics. So my first question is the fundamental one. What is tokenomics? And either of you feel free to take it away.
Go ahead, Roderick, you first.
Okay. All right. There is no Cambridge University Press or Harvard definition for this, right? We are working it out, and lots of people have different ideas. Now, I think there's a narrow definition. It's very token centric. It's mostly focused on how many tokens there are, who gets them, when they get them. And, that reflects on the nature of the design of the first crypto assets, which were, currencies and similar monetary instruments of that sort. Now, as blockchain technology has become more capable and flexible, and have become able to design these richer systems, I think tokenomics has begun to take on a broader definition that has more in common with what we learned about in academic economics. And really, we're now beginning to talk about any collection of rules and devices and instruments that somehow make use or harness value-seeking behavior in human beings in order to create or improve on some economic service. Now that's really broad, but basically, we're all out to get something, and the way we play and the way we go about doing that changes based on our environment, who are the other people. This is sort of like quite a game theoretic view in a sense of how we understand that. And once we have all of these tools and devices, then we can start thinking quite broadly about that. So the narrow and the broad definition there, in my view.
I couldn't agree more. There is certainly no definition, and at best it's changing. At worst, everybody has a different definition. So I completely agree there. If I were to phrase how I frame my personal thinking about tokenomics, I think it as platform design, but with wrinkles. So platform design is something we know a lot about. It's, you can think of technological platform or kind of a mini marketplace where people that come to exchange value. The difference with tokenomics is that there are several key differences. So one, in typical platform design and platform competition, we make in economics the assumption that the platforms are profit motivated. My experience in Web3 has been that the motivation has been more multidimensional. So there's a motivation for decentralization. There's a motivation for censorship resistance. For that reason, tokenomics doesn't necessarily fit so squarely into platform design, something we know a lot about. There's a wrinkle. The main wrinkle, I would say, though, is the lack of institutions. So if you're designing a platform in, Web 2 or kind of, what I call real life, you have the institutions of the countries and the legal systems and the cultural norms and everything like that. The most important one, obviously, is trust, right? Trust is established through these institutions, whether it's legal trust, whether it's implicit trust. Of course, in decentralized platforms, we don't have that. So now we have platform design where the designers are not necessarily purely profit motivated, or at least maybe they say they're not purely profit motivated, and we lack the institutions. So when we're doing platform design to make a good protocol, to make a good platform, we have to think about how we address those differences. Another main difference between traditional platform design and tokenomics is the pseudo-anonymous and civil, and the implication that you can have civil attacks. That's something that's not very common. It is possible, right? Everybody can create a second email address and attack a system one way or another. But in Web3 and in tokenized platforms, it's typically a lot easier. And there's a lot of documentation on costs of Sybils, that things that you would do if there wasn't a Sybil actually become really hard, and sometimes even impossible. Just distributing a subsidy based on identities becomes really hard when you have the possibility of a Sybil. So that's another wrinkle we have to include into our platform design. The last one, it's a little bit more of socio-political, but the change process is a lot different. So, if you're a company and you're running a platform, you have to get you take customer feedback, but really to get the changes implemented, it's within that company to approve the change based on some commonly defined goal. In Web3, there is a lot of community involvement and different perspectives and different stakeholders. And there is a strong incentive to make sure that all of those are heard and incorporated. So the change process is a lot different, which means that it's platform design, but you have to take into account the choices that you make can actually be quite sticky.
Alejandra, would you like an answer to your opening question about why we saw this big shift from public sales down to that taking a much smaller slice of the token supply pie?
That's exactly what I was going to get to. I can't be the only one that wants your opinion on this. I'm sure there's plenty in the audience. Yeah, if you can tackle that, it'd be great.
Yeah, so I only got in the last bull cycle, but my understanding is that the first ICOs were essentially, you transferred funds into a wallet and then you got stuff back out, and there wasn't really much structure to the way that these were offered. And the first way that people were experimenting with the software mechanism was just to sell as much as they could possibly sell, and that being sort of like the way that people would raise funds, and you would sell as much as demand would take. What happened with that model is that it gave a lot of people a lot of tokens, which, due to the fundamental nature of how these tokens work, can be traded permissionlessly. So suddenly you've got markets that are awash with tons and tons and tons of tokens, and they become valueless in a large majority of cases. So the way we've seen the offering pivot in this particular respect is to limit the number of sales, the amount of liquidity essentially that's put in the hands of public parties right at the start, and pivot to a model where the supply is allowed to increase over time. Unfortunately, that gets hacked because, once the liquidity is small, you can manipulate the market in other ways. And in terms of, this business of allocating all these tokens to ecosystem and stuff, eh, you know, it's not always it reads like a sophisticated decision. But I've been in rooms, when I started out, I was taking directions from other people. I didn't know what was going on. I was sort of like just I was following their instructions, and people were just choosing these words based on whatever sounded impressive. And furthermore, what I've seen other advisors do is, you have all these allocations, and then there are no controls. There are no controls really. Once the tokens are unlocked, if those tokens are in the control of the operator, I've seen schemes where they siphon them through to continue funneling rewards. So it is, and at the same time, there's also something that's always struck me as a little ridiculous and odd. I mean, we have a CFO crowd here tonight, right? How many of you would sign up to a company budget where the budget that you draw up for yourself before you receive capital from your investors is the budget you have to stick to for the next 5 years or 10 years of your existence? That's entirely ridiculous. So we're in a place where there is, these efforts at creating transparency are really, they don't add up. We should be in a position to revise, and I think there's something lacking in creating greater accountability and robustness over how, token resources are used and handled by central parties. So to summarize that story, that if that change is both one of, real economic need to limit supply and of tokens in the market during in the early stages of project life, and also a little bit of, dressing things up to make it look like tokens are going to go somewhere else when many times they don't, unfortunately.
Really interesting. Thank you for addressing that. Justin, is there anything you'd like to add here?
No, thank you. I didn't know that.
Fantastic. We're all learning. Okay, let's let's move on. And one thing that's interesting is that, of course, every Web3 project is different. You've got different levels of community involvement, you've got different levels of decentralization. But despite all of the differences, can you please share what you would call the key principles for good token economy design? Justin, go ahead and start.
Sure. If I were to simplify it to just one, there's one take home that I would say is that your platform that functions on the tokenomic design does not function in a vacuum. There are both centralized and decentralized competitors for the most part to a lot of the Web3 and the tokenized platforms. And those need to be considered when you're making tokenomics decisions. So it's not enough to just have kind of internal within protocol consistency of your tokenomic design. You also have to think about how those design choices impact your protocol's competitiveness with either other decentralized protocols or centralized competitors. And just a key example of this is staking. So staking is very common, obviously. It provides security, it establishes trust, but it's not free. Right? There is a cost of capital. So when you're going to require in a protocol people to stake or your participants to stake, how cost effective is that staking? And what are they buying for that stake? And how does what they're buying for that stake compare with the cost of what they can buy with that cost of capital outside of the platform? Just because a platform is kind of internally consistent, it's not enough to make it a successful tokenomic platform. That is, I would say the number one take home of sound tokenomic design. Absent kind of like this internal consistency thing, what I see lacking most is the caring about the rest of the competitive landscape.
Great. Roderick, what are your key?
Yeah, I'll join in on that. Any design, you're running a business. You're running a business in competition with other people, and you have to factor that into your design. There are all these, if you're an engineer by training, you might want to try and bring that sort of purity to your design work, but it's just not. It's not practical. And unfortunately, talking about the example of staking is very appropriate because it's a very unfortunate one in the way that competitive dynamics tend to push project because, how do you stake it? How do you compete for attention? You put higher APY and that just, it's a race to the bottom because there's no way you can build underlying value that quickly to match that yield that you're just shelling out to everybody. But some of the people I worked with were in an unfortunate position where that was the retail environment, and that was the only thing they felt they could do to stay relevant. So it's a very difficult issue to navigate. In terms of what I think are some good principles for tokenomic design, and they have to be principles because the design space here is vast. We're talking about a real general purpose technology that we can wrap around all kinds of business ideas. So the view I've come to is that I think it's a lot of the time this bottoms out into three general groups. You've got your users, your investors, and the team or the operators, as I would call them. And they're kind of mirrored by sort of three facilities or institutions on chain. You've got whatever smart contracts that are delivering utility to the users. You've got the exchange markets, which is how people convert into other assets of preference. And then you've got the treasury and governance processes, which, for the sake of argument, let's just say they're fully under the control of the operator. Let's not worry about DAOs and decentralized governance. So you've got these three things, and they're really good to have in view because these core groups have really opposing interests to each other. They're really not aligned. One of the things is the first stories that I was coming across about tokenization is that's meant to solve this stakeholder problem. Well, how they say how companies are run for shareholders, and if only workers had the same stake as the shareholders, everybody would be the same. And tokenomics solves that because now everybody cares about the token, but they don't care about the token the same way. The investors want to sell out. They're in this because they get exit liquidity earlier than they would under an equity sale, provided the market conditions are favorable. The users want to use something, but that is typically tied to the price, which is affected by what the investors do. And the operators may have a long-term financing strategy, and they're trying to leverage the token to deliver that. But they tied their hands to raise money, to grant tokens to the investors. So there are these really complex trade-offs. But having a very clear group view of these high-level groups, I think, is a really a helpful place to start. Yes, depending on the project, they'll break out into subgroups, subtypes, but that's a really good way to begin, I think. Let's see. After that, I think it's really good to have a clear idea of what your token is referencing. What does your token represent? Because tokens are only ever representations of value. If I give you a token, you know, nothing, right? There, you don't derive, there is no intrinsic hedonic benefit to reading the token address like string. Like there's nothing that you get from it. It is, if it is valuable because it stands in for something. And for the majority of people, it's valuable as an instrument for speculation. It's valuable as something you can sell into the market to earn more than you bought it for. But ideally, if we are designing these systems in good faith, that token does something more than just serve as an instrument for speculation. So really getting to a clear view of what it represents, and then how you capture that value. How do you design the system so that this token actually allows you to play a video game or gives you access to a lending service? How have you tightened the bolts? How have you created those linkages so that we now value the token as if it were an access token to the game or an opportunity to lend? We have to make those linkages strong. Another thing that I see that's really commonly uh, it's not a good idea is that people will have their own token and they'll have some sort of revenue process. They'll collect fees centrally based on this token. That's great if you're soaring and the markets are all up. But what happens suddenly when things go down? And all you've been collecting revenues in these tokens. You think everybody in your team is going to be happy to continue receiving payment in tokens when they're not worth anything? All of your outgoings and liabilities are as a company are in fiat. So something I started doing that sometimes get some pushback for is that I insist on there being a revenue collection process that's denominated in stable assets. And I get pushback because everyone's so tied into this idea that the token has to be like a currency as well. Because if it's not being used to buy and sell everything that's happening inside the economy, you're losing an important utility. I'm saying that it is just too risky to do that from the bat. You need to anchor yourself to something that's stable, and then you're naturally funding your treasury with stable value. And there are fewer market actions you have to take to keep your treasury replenished. And then, yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of like those are a few things. Um, Identify your key stakeholders, what your token references, how you're capturing that value, and make sure you have some process that tethers the value in your economy to something that's liquid and stable. Just as an anecdote, the treasury of one of my clients was super happy to see like thousands and thousands and thousands of tokens being released to them each month. And then we have a call with the market makers, and they're like, well, you can only spend 10% of what is being unlocked to you every month if you don't want to avoid crashing the price. And we're not talking about 10% of everything, 10% of everything that they're getting each month. And so this becomes totally useless as a resource. And I've attended other conversations with your leaders in Web3 CFO Club who've shared similar stories. So I know that this is fairly commonplace.
Thank you, Roderick. And your point earlier about token utility is really interesting. And I have a follow-up question to that for both of you. Does every Web3 project even need a token?
Yeah.
You go.
Yeah. Depends on what you mean by need. Because let's not forget, tokens are a fundraising opportunity as well, an alternative route. I know, and we don't want to touch on this, but there are some questions about whether it's a viable one in the long term. So in some sense, if it lowers the barrier to, getting the necessary funds, then maybe you do need the token. Does every project need a token as to provide value to the platform users? I think that question, without giving you a yes or no, is less established, let's say. I don't think that everybody would say that yes, every platform right now needs a token, but I also don't think everybody would say that no platforms need a token. There's obviously extremes on both sides, but that's still very much an open question.
Yeah. I would reply, starting off with exactly what Justin said, that yes, you have to take into consideration uh, the outrageous benefits of the how you can raise capital, or how you have been able to raise capital with this instrument, and that has to hang in the balance with everything else. Um, as for it's really tricky. Sometimes is do you want, when you think of where you want to open a new shop, you look at the neighborhood where you're going to open the shop. And, sometimes opening into new markets is about setting up in a district that doesn't have much commerce yet. So even though a blockchain token implementation of a certain business um, idea may not be optimal, it may be interesting from a longer term strategic perspective, because you're like, okay, this is me opening a McDonald's in Russia or something. Like, this is taking new territory and creating awareness and brand, and also learning about how things work in this space. So even when it's not optimal from business point of view, I think there can be arguments. Even sometimes, like gimmicky things, you could run like a brand awareness campaign with points or something, but now they want to do it with NFTs. There's some validity of that. There's hipness to that, but you could absolutely implement that with a totally centralized database or something else entirely. You don't need any of that. So it's a gray area. There's definitely, in a lot of cases, people don't need it, and there are none of these other reasons to compensate for it, other than the founders wanting to try their hand at buying a lottery ticket. So it's nebulous, but for me, if I work with a client, and for them it's like, look, we have access to capital through this route, or that's a valid enough reason. Until the rules everywhere in the world tell us no, not this way. I understand. I think that's a reasonable motivation to want to have a token.
Yeah, Roderick stepped a little further than I was comfortable with, but now I will catch up to you. So, given that the token exists, does the economic efficiency of a platform depend on the existence of that token? And many, many times the answer is no. There are extra sociological factors that Roderick, sorry, that was alluding to, outside of the economic efficiency of the platform, that may provide some benefit, but many times the economic efficiency of the platform does not depend on the existence of that token, given that it already exists.
Great. Thank you both. Really helpful to hear that. Let's move on. Let's talk about tools. Like you said, we do have a CFO audience here. Tool stack is sacred. So there are some tools on the market that are designed to help us with token modeling and evaluating scenarios. A couple that we know of are Machinations and the quantitative token model by Outlier Ventures. But
Mhm.
but we've heard that these tools are complex. There can be a really steep learning curve. So how do you know if you're okay using Roll Excel, or if you do need to get a specialized tool and it's going to be worth it? When do you make that decision?
I'll dive in with this one. It's tricky. Again, that it depends. Um, but at some point, you are going to have to get familiar with new tools. I think that just comes with the territory. My opinion on Machinations, for those of you who don't know, it's a visual style builder, and it was originally developed to support the development of game economies And I really like it as a tool. I geek out over it, and I think it's really cool because it sort of like gives you a bunch of Lego blocks, but those low level Lego blocks are economically meaningful. In a game economic context, you have things that emit money, things that absorb money, things that multiply, and they're just sort of like basic units that put you into a designer's frame of mind, just because your basic stuff is already sort of like designed in that. And then it's got this really cute feature where you sort of hit go and you see how resources flow around, and it's incredibly engaging to work with. Now, I come from an M&A background. I've had to work on deals which are very valuable, and the amount of diligence and care that had to go into checking the model and understanding how it worked was huge. And that experience makes me a bit nervous about building very complicated tools with machinations because it's not optimized for that sort of documentation. The context in which game developers create game economies is also very different. There's a very large and substantial quality control and game testing phase that takes place before they go live with their with their economies in the game. And to date, we are not designing complex blockchain economic sort of devices in the same way. At least in the last cycle, the rush was to get to market as soon as possible and sort of like try and put reliance on this sort of like little toy model before you go live. So machinations in a game development context maybe can tolerate things not working out because then they show up in the testing. But if you're going to go to market with just a model and not subject your model to live user testing, I think it doesn't have the sort of documentation support. The quantitative token model, I've met Achim Struve, the author, and I was lucky to take a deep tour with others when he presented it about a year ago, and he offered that also as a point for discussion and development. There are certain things. I don't think that's too complex a tool. If you are a CFO, it's in a spreadsheet environment. You should be able to get your head around that. Personally, him and I have had discussions about this. Um, I hesitate to deliver a tool that has any kind of token price forecasting in it. I think it is a very sensitive variable to forecast, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for clients on the other side to misinterpret what that forecast represents. And Ahim has always replied saying it's just a forecast. You can't take that. And I see, but it's it's really tricky to sort of like build a model that loops in all the mechanics of the DEX to come up with a view of what the price is going to look like in the long term. I think that's very risky. um, I think we're better off sort of like stress testing what the bounds, making sure that there's nothing that's going to break the price in the way we would expect something to run, rather than sort of like trying and forecast things out. But I think it's a very good tool for getting your head around some very simple things, some sort of like a simple sort of sketching for what your business plan is going to be. There's a tool called CAD by Block Science and RadCAD. That's a Python-based library. I haven't started working with it myself, but there's a community called Token Engineering Academy. They have great teaching resources, and you can take up some free courses that teach you how to work with that tool. And that's sort of like more agent level simulation. You have players, you have strategies, and you see how things play out. Um, I like I said, I'm coming to this as someone who is not an expert, trying to figure out how much of an expert I am, so to speak. I don't want to do work for clients that is bad or that it does not represent good fit for the job. So I have a very strong Excel financial modeling skill set, and I wanted to understand where are the limits of that, because there are things that Excel can do really well. We're still basing all kind really valuable, important decisions on it, but it's important to understand when it's not the right tool. And that depends on the nature of the system and the decision making context. So let's take an example of a DEX. If I was designing a DEX that had, all of these intricate mechanisms, modeling curves that really detail how people are going to interact, I would be using a kind of Python-based library or MATLAB sort of thing to explore that, because that's really dense, and the parameters you need to explore, the range of values is very large, and they can interact in very unexpected ways. However, if I'm taking Uniswap v2 or even Uniswap v3, and I already know what the sort of high level, what the patterns of activity are at a high level, at an aggregate level, how many buyers and sellers there are, the sort of 90-day variance, what's the sort of like maximum movement we're like to see in a 90-day period. I would, provided you get that data, and you would need to get that data through an on-chain provider of one kind or another, but provided you can get that data, I would argue a spreadsheet model can still give you a reasonably good and insightful evaluation. And otherwise, if you're designing, if you're modeling for a business that's really conventional, like seller, loads of little buyers, you can run that in an Excel model, because to give you, when you look at whether a business is profitable or not, all you have to work out is whether the revenues are higher than your costs. There are no surprises as revenues fall or as costs come up. You know that the point of failure is costs being higher than revenues, right? Whereas what happens in these more intricate systems is that as things change, you don't know where the points of failure are. They can blow up somewhere. So this is sort of like where my thinking is going on what the right tools are. When I'm personally now doing some work on June. I've been teaching myself some SQL, and it's amazing the kind of data that you can pull out from there. So I think analytics and learning to use these on-chain analysis platforms is going to be very important. I personally think that should be one of your key hires. You need to have a data analyst or data scientist on board, because if you do not know what people are doing with your smart contract, you are in the dark. You're in the dark. It's so I really think I don't see that being prioritized. I haven't seen it being prioritized with a lot of projects. So anyway, long spiel. Yeah, that's what I think.
That's great advice. Thank you, Roderick. Justin, what are your views on tools and methods?
Sure, and I'll be brief, because Roderick definitely knows the tools better than I do. First of all, double down on the data science. I had mentioned earlier that I was kind of brought on at mechanism design and game theory. Data science is taking over my life. It is so important. I can't I can't emphasize that enough. So I don't have any expertise with these specific tools. I have to say it doesn't surprise me that they're complex. We know that like models with acting decision makers are very hard to run, very hard to simulate, almost impossible to solve at any kind of reasonable size, if for anything useful. So it doesn't surprise me that they are complex. The classic refrain, like all models are wrong, but some are useful. I would say that really applies here. That yes, please use models, whether it's your in-house economist doing it, whether it's a tool from somewhere else. Yes, you can use them, but they're guideposts. They're not the ground truth. They're ways to give evidence for a decision one way or another. And if the tool or the person that you're working with is providing you a model and a model-based solution, if they don't tell you what the hidden risks are in that, it's probably wrong. So always trying to be
Mhm.
aware of the hidden risks and kind of the confounding variables that were left out of the model to make it tractable when making a decision. And it's not, this is what you should do. Here's a piece of evidence that should sway your decision a little bit one way or another. Just be aware of the risks of any model.
Great. Thank you, Justin. That's helpful advice. Let's move on to token distributions and maybe talk about purpose and effective use of minting. So, starting with investors, what are some good practices with regards to token lockups, token warrant, safe?
I have a brief one that I could do, and then Roderick, you can maybe take some of the detailed comments. So a high level that I have for distribution is that distribution should be investment driven. So right now it's kind of, there's a mint rate and it goes to these people because we think these are the ones that need to be subsidized or whatever it may be. But what I think the kind of community lacks is, here's our objective. This is what we want to achieve, whether it's profit, whether it's something else. And here's how we will use our funding to subsidize that type of behavior. Um, Why it's always a fixed rate or typically a fixed rate, I'm not sure, but I think there's a lack of investment-driven decision when it comes to issuance and minting, and that's my high-level take on that. I'll let Roderick speak on the specifics.
Yeah, the dirty truth here is that the investors have you bend over a barrel for this one, and they dictate terms. Um, the length of vesting schedules was not determined by economic rationale, economic rationale that was optimizing for the platform. It was determined by what was selling to investors in the current market. So that's and that's what I call the realpolitik of some of these tokenomic decisions. And we can hate it, but that's what's happening. So it becomes a constraint on the rest of our design, because if we don't play, we don't get to raise. There is a bit of evolution on this issue, however. So one of the other things that's a little odd, going back to my previous comment about how strange is it to like set yourself up, decide your budget for 5 to 10 years out, and stay with that forever. So most of the token vesting schedules are time based, and that's it. Time, no conditions, no milestones, nothing. And that's really weird. Doesn't make any economic sense to even a layman. Could stop and think about that and say that's strange. And But the factors involved are so dynamic that you can't decide this upfront. Um, what we are seeing there's some proposals. One came out of Outlier Ventures again. Ahim was working on this dynamic vesting model that would sort of like track key indicators and modulate how much you would release based on that said KPI. Um, and Algorand implemented an algorithmic approach, and they actually implemented it. I did some deep analysis of this for my client, and they kind of got lucky that the market went really hot when they did this. So it looked like it performed quite well, but it did arrest sort of like the slide of the token, and managed to get confidence behind the value of the token. Now, it sounds like a good idea, but again, we would be optimizing it on a whim. There's no real strong way to calibrate these rules, and we're up against that bigger challenge, this like expectations and conventions of investing, which don't handle these kind of things too well, or aren't familiar with them. What I've seen coming through the ranks are the safe plus token warrants. So safe is agreement for future equity, and then there's an option to buy tokens, and that makes a lot of sense. It's a lot. A lot of founders were really fond of this idea that they could raise money without giving away equity or control, and they've had to like sacrifice that. And but I think this is the way to go. I think contracts which have more optionality and more conditions, triggers. And we have those kind of financial instruments in the conventional world, but more of that kind of stuff would help us optimize, and maybe in simpler ways than an algorithmic rule, which is really quite complicated. We just have some conventional legal terms that say, okay, if market liquidity is this deep, it's okay for you to unload your tokens, and we'll release them to you or something. So there are signs of a trend, but most people are still doing the time-based vesting thing, and still in the hands of investors to dictate those terms.
Okay. So for from the perspective of the employee, is there a general benchmark for token vesting? Or can you share like a specific case that you think has worked well?
I'm sad to say that I spend most of my time looking at things that don't work. No, I've gone into a rabbit hole. I've been doing a lot of sort of more theory sort of thinking, so I haven't really been keeping an eye out for the projects that are doing things right. Um, I think that the most general thing you can say about issuance from a theoretical perspective, because also the difficulty with minting issuance is that the effects, because there's sort of like a bit of decoupling between what goes on and what's happening in the markets, in the macro environment. The sort of fundamentals of what's happening to supply don't show up in the market immediately. And that makes it very hard to sort of correlate or determine what the impact of certain things were, and whether it really was a decisive factor. Just from a very sort of theoretical point of view, you want to try and increase your supply at the same rate that you're likely that you can see value grow. So if the way you can start thinking about this problem is like, look at a Web2 company. How quickly do they grow their sales? Do you really think that there's some magic source in blockchain that would allow you to outstrip the growth of a conventional company by a factor of 100? Probably not. So start working your way from there, benchmark to real growth things. And this is what I told people in one of my talks recently. It takes companies, I heard, an average of 2 years to turn cash flow positive. Why should you be planning on things that those fundamentals not applying to your project? Yes, there are the exceptions, but if you plan your entire financial strategy on unicorn or bust, the odds are against you. You gotta plan for the downsides and accommodate them. We all want to be winners. We all want to do the best we can, but in this game, you've really gotta look at the downsides too and hedge for them. So that's kind of how I would go about it. Is like, look at your users. How many users? If you've committed to a revenue mechanism that collects dollar money, how quickly is that going to grow? And how long, where do you think that could be in 10 years? And sort of like try and calibrate very roughly on that. You're never going to pin it down. It's always going to be wrong. But, at least try not to be wildly wrong by following this sort of approach. That's my view.
Great. Thanks so much. I'm going to squeeze in one last question because after that, we've got to turn to our audience questions. We have a few. And then just a reminder for those of you in the audience, on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little question mark. That's the questions tab. If you've got something to ask our panelists, now is the time. Put your question in there. But just quickly, let's talk about value capture. So roughly, as a platform is used, how do passive token holders earn an income? Justin, you answer.
Sure. Sure. So there's some documentation, theoretical literature that basically says even if your token doesn't have any value capture mechanism, think of it as a burn or token redistribution. As demand for your token does indeed grow, then yes, you can see the token appreciate in price. There's a caveat though. What this means is that if there is no explicit value capture mechanism, token holders capture no value for high but consistent usage. So imagine you build a very, very successful platform. Everybody in the world is using it, but you're not getting more users. Without an explicit value capture mechanism, your token is not going to capture any of that. Now, value capture, what does that mean? It basically means a way for passive token holders to earn. This can come through burning. It can come through redistribution of tokens. It could come through by increasing staking requirements. These are all things that you can test for various inefficiencies under different assumptions. Um, but it's straightforward. The way to think about it is value capture is basically redistributing profits, right? It's the Web2 equivalent of redistributing profits. So the decision is, when do we want to redistribute profits to our shareholders, which in this case are token holders? And that's a well-studied business decision. It's not new to Web3. How you do it is a little bit different. Maybe there's a couple other mechanisms in which you can do it, but it's not a new decision. It's not a new type of decision.
Yeah. So the standout example here, which is actually very much in the news, is the Uniswap governance token, because Uniswap generates a lot of fees through its use, but they're all captured by the liquidity providers, the LPs, and the Uniswap protocol had no stake in those enormous revenues. And they've just voted, the foundation finally pushed through and decided to turn this switch on, and they're going to start collecting. So and some of that benefit is going to accrue to the holders of the governance token. So that's an example. The Uniswap token was always held up as an example of a token that didn't have value capture. However, Uniswap was such an incredible success that it is the one example where the lack of value capture did not materially hinder its way. It saw a bit of a challenge from Sushi Swap for a while, which did have these value capture mechanics, but then it didn't. So that's more of an example of we're talking about a kind of pass-through mechanism where fees are passed through to token holders. The way to create value accretion by burning or buybacks, these are kind of different and interesting. And you can have market operations where you're actually influencing the price of the token because you're buying on there, or you could have actions that occur outside of markets, in which case you're more exposed to the sort of lags that I was talking about. Um, but fundamentally, whether you're buying back on the market or you're burning out of the market, the fundamental logic is that scarcer things tend to be more valuable if demand is holding up on the other side of that. Um, all of this, however, this entire discussion takes place in the frame that the primary, one of the core purposes of the token is as to serve as some kind of investment instrument. And once we get round to thinking in a more level-headed way about how we want to design these systems, there will be some systems where we don't want to have a token that's ever more expensive forever. There'll be certain things, certain people get, think about these video games where certain people got locked out at a time, and then you had like NFT landlords and consortia. That we had this horrible thing of, we replicated the worst sides of capitalism in these virtual worlds, right? There'll be applications where that's not appropriate, but because the primary motivation for most people is to use this as for financial speculation and to raise funds, that price appreciation has to be looked after. It's part of our design constraints at the moment. And it will be interesting to see how that shakes out as regulations move forward. But yeah, and very interesting and very important topic. Very lastly, you can't make this work without there being demand on the other side. You can't just shrink and burn the token supply and say that, well, it's scarce, so it's valuable. And that's what SafeMoon tried to do, and they're going to jail, or at least they're trying to put them in there. That doesn't make sense, guys. You gotta have some reason that people want this thing other than to speculate. Otherwise, yeah, you're setting yourself for a pretty explosive situation.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you. All right, let's turn it to the audience questions. Our first one is from Maggie, and we've touched on this a bit already, but let's see what you might want to add. How would you think about the structure of traditional equity versus token ownership for investors in the team? How do these pieces fit together?
Yeah, I made a video on this. You can catch up with that at some time if you like. They're completely different things, right? And there are typically a bundle of rights, legally enforceable rights that are associated with equity ownership, whereas ownership in its most minimal form is you hold a token. Congratulations, this is your token. There's nothing. There are no voting rights. With an equity instrument, it is illegal for the company to make false disclosures about its financial position. You're entitled to that. You're entitled to certain voting rights and stuff. Everything, in its most minimal unregulated form that we've had to date, owning a token is just owning a token. I've also compared the relationship between equity investors and token investors as being like, the difference between a marriage and volatile polyamory. With you're with the equity investors, you're in there for a long time. You've got to work stuff out until you go public. Equity investors get a bad rap for being too short termist as it is, but they are generally locked in for at least 5 years. With these token sales, they are at the core permissionless. As soon as it's unlocked, it is yours to do with as you will. It's a very different. It invites a very different kind of relationship, and you end up having to do. It's not to say that all investors will sell on you, but the onus will be on you to do your diligence and be careful in a way that you don't have to be careful with the other things. And on the investor side, yeah, all you're getting is a token until this becomes more regulated. So I think that's what I would summarize as being two key differences there.
One more. Equity usually gives you a share of profits. So you think of an equity pays a dividend, or maybe they reinvest it, but more or less you're thinking about a share of profits. With tokens, with traditional value captures that have traditionally been implemented, it actually gives you a share of revenue because you're saying you're taking a cut, for example, of every transaction and burning it. That's not a share of profits, that's a share of revenue. That mismatch in alignment can actually be crucial, and some would even say that it's detrimental for the token, and only in some certain cases does a token provide as much efficiency or is as good as equity. So there is another kind of technical difference there in kind of a profit sharing agreement versus a revenue sharing agreement.
Great. Thank you both. Our next question is from Oliver. In token financial P&L models, non-issue tokens often seem to be ignored in open. I'm wondering if token option for employees, investors should be captured as shared-based comp upon vesting in order not to understate OPEX to the protocol.
So this I don't know what you have to do for compliance purposes. But fundamentally, you should be looking at these things as cost. Now, how are they a cost? We're still working that out. In some sense, you're you're selling into the market, and if the market's strong, then that's okay. But that's if we go back to what I was saying earlier, your value growth has to catch up to that at some point. So sometimes I use some sort of dilution analysis to try and get my head around how expensive are these tokens. If the market cap holds steady and you dilute it by this increased supply, how much is that costing us on the price? And if I'm relying on the token to do some funding for my treasury, how does that impact my options? So that's how I'm trying to think my way around this sort of issue systematically. But clearly they're not a cost in the traditional sense that they have to be funded by revenues, because you've just printed these tokens out of thin air. They're just sitting there in your treasury. So it is the cost as an operating expense there has to be some understanding that it is different. You don't have to source the dollar funds. They're just there, but the cost shows up in strange ways further on down the line. Um, so, another way that I see this done is when you're doing rewards is like, what's the lifetime value of a customer? You better make sure that these tokens that you're spending at current market rates, are you're spending less in value than the value you're getting back from from the lifetime value of that customer. So these are sort of ways that I think help you get a more methodical grip on these kind of issues.
They're saying there's no such thing as free money.
There isn't.
Of course,
No.
of course
It's
not.
bite you in the backside. Where do you think this is? Where does this come from? Like it's thermodynamics at the end of the day, man. Like it's got to come from somewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's no such thing as free money. I'm so sorry. We're all out of time. We're gonna have to leave it here. We've got lots more questions in the conversation. So I'm gonna try to figure out, Justin and Roderick, if you're willing, if we can maybe answer these still async and get them back to our members, because they're all great questions. Once again, if you haven't joined the Web3 CFO Club, please do join us. It's web3cfo.club. You can submit your application there. And Justin, Roderick, thank you so much for being with us today. It was a great conversation, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, and thank you,
Lots of
Roger.
fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very
Pleasure.
rarely
Thank you, everybody.
in Web3 do I see two people agree this much, and I agree with everything you said. So this is great. This is very refreshing.
Pleasure to meet you all. Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Thanks so much. Bye,
Yeah.
everyone. Have a
Bye.
great